Beth Conway, and I'm happy to be here tonight because I am an advocate for education, public education in particular, but there are some concerns that I wanted to try and inform you about so that you would have more information to go forward. So I'm focusing on discipline and classroom management in schools. Okay, you can click. So when I tried to identify the 4 kind of top tier reasons for the management and discipline issues, I came with these top 4. And the first is restorative practices and restorative justice. And I'm going to explain what those are to you. A lack of adequate numbers of social emotional support personnel, large class sizes, and school discipline and data reporting concerns. Okay. So let me explain first, because I think in the news you hear a lot about restorative practices, restorative justice. So let me explain what it is, what we as teachers, what we as administrators learn and are taught to use in the schools. So restorative practices in and of themselves are wonderful because they build community, they build relationships between teacher and student, student to student, but there's a caveat. So let me explain what they are first. So what they do, their purpose is to foster an equitable and positive school culture. They focus again on building those relationships, and they provide students and adults with an intentional, inclusive, and respectful way to talk about behavior. And a lot of times it's negative behavior. So examples of restorative processes. So in my district, for example, we actually, as an administrator, I had a little card. Each teacher had a little card with questions we were supposed to ask the students when they had a behavior issue. So for example, I'd pull on the side and I'd say, Susan, how are you feeling when you hit the other student? How do you think that made that student feel? And go through that procedure. So that is, in a very quick explanation, what restorative practices look like and sound like. Okay. The problem is, in my opinion, is that what's happened is restorative practices and restorative justice have taken over everything and taken away from negative consequences that students need, and they deserve to learn what the real world is like and to learn, again, that there are consequences. So we know, and if you go into a school system, you will see this. There are children who are struggling, children with trauma, who have experienced trauma, children who are not in ideal home situations. That is real. These restorative practices help the children learn the adequate social skills and things. But what it does is, while those children are learning, if we keep them in the classrooms and don't have consequences for them, it's taking away the learning of all of the other students in the classrooms. So what we are being told as teachers and administrators is that for students impacted by trauma and toxic stress, consequences that are not exclusionary or disciplinary in the traditional manner have been shown to be more effective in changing the behavior. So, for example, taking a child out of a classroom, if they're calling out or blurting out, they're hitting, they're not wanting to do the work, they're refusing to do the work, they're needing control in their lives, taking them out isn't necessarily fixing the problem for them, what research is saying, which is true. But again, keeping them in that classroom is negatively impacting every other student in the classroom. Okay, next slide. So I just wanted to share an example of what teachers and administrators are seeing as part of our training. So this slide is from the National Center for School Safety. So if you were a teacher sitting in a training, this is one of the slides you could very possibly see. So why not use exclusionary discipline? Exclusion is based on a wait to fail model. The educator's description of the event drives the consequence. And that's where I kind of wanted to go, well, duh, the teacher or the administrator is the one who was there. They're the adult in the classroom. They're the one writing the discipline referral. Absolutely, it's going to be their description of the event. But when you're thinking about restorative practices and restorative justice, their question is, Is that accurate? And that's where I have to say, as a professional, you need to trust that we are there doing the right thing for students and being a professional. Thirdly, misinterpretations of behavior occur when students and teachers come from different cultures. And so that is a third, and I agree, cultures are different, but at the same time, we have a common set of norms, a common set of rules that we in schools have to follow, and we have a code of conduct that is we need to follow. So that's a tough one. Research shows that exclusionary discipline does not change behavior, and that's what I just specified, that research really does show that for kids who are misbehaving, that doesn't necessarily change their behavior, but at the same time, it's impacting the other kids. So that's just an example of what you might see. Okay, next one. So the rationale behind this is that we need to focus on the misbehaving student's behavior and then use strategies to change it. However, the state of Delaware gives schools, districts, the autonomy and the ownership to create a code of conduct that should and needs to be followed. And that's actually from Title 14 of Delaware Code. And it states that it defines disruptive behavior as conduct that is so unruly, disruptive, or abusive that it seriously interferes with the school teacher's or school's administrator's ability to communicate with the student in a classroom, the student's ability to learn, or the operation of a school or school-sponsored activity. So what's truly happening in schools today, and I would bet my life in every school today, at least at the elementary school level, there are children hitting, kicking, spitting, biting. I shared last night I had one jump on my back and pull my hair, riding me like a horse, and I was like, oh wow, holy cow. So are those children in crisis? Absolutely they are. Do they need help? Absolutely they do. But they also need it in a separate way from what's being done, because if we keep that behavior, again, in the classroom, it's taking away from the other students. So each district creates their own code of conduct. So for example, in my district, we had the code of conduct specifies if this is the first time that the student has hit another student, for example, first offense, this is the consequence. Second offense, these two are possible consequences. Third offense, that's usually when suspension can occur. But it's up to the district's discretion on which to follow and when to classify it as that. So what the state is doing is they are collecting data. It goes into a system called eSchool, and so we input every discipline referral, and then that's sent out as statewide and district-wide data. Well, it doesn't look good if you think they don't want there to be a lot of behaviors, because of course we all understand misbehavior means less learning. So, and they want the restorative practice rather than the exclusionary. So that's leading to some of that as well. Okay, next slide. So what does that look like in the classroom? Well, one of the things is, again, they're trying to keep children in the classroom. So for example, a child is blurting out or not staying in their seat. Sometimes me as the administrator would go in, call the child out, use my restorative questions, take them for a walk. Well, one-on-one, they're great. They'll give me those answers, and they're getting that attention that they want and may very well need. But then I would take them right back to the classroom. Well, that's so defeating as a teacher, because they're doing everything they can to do their job well, and then this child comes right back, and then many times, because of course I wasn't giving them everything that they needed and the amount of support that they needed, the behavior would just occur again. So that's one thing. The other thing is sometimes the counselor would come into the classroom, sit with the child, and try and support the child in the classroom. So the child, that may work, but then the children around that child are being disrupted because the counselor's there working with that child, or sometimes it didn't work and then they would still have to remove the child. I think the most upsetting and frustrating thing for me was, though, when I was told that now when a child is, and again, K-5 classroom, so it's going to look different at the middle school than the high school. But a child would be tantruming. So for example, crawling under the table, pushing out chairs, making a lot of noise. Any type of disruption like that, now what is happening when there's safety, a potential safety hazard, that child remains in the classroom, the rest of the class is taken out. So the teacher takes the rest of the class out, well, and then where is that going to be? Sometimes it would be to the gym, sometimes the auditorium, sometimes it might be outside, sometimes we had a pod so they could take them out on the pod, but again, their learning time was being disrupted. Then the child that remained in the classroom, they were worked with probably myself, the counselor, the psychologist, the social worker, to become calm. Well, that was done for two reasons. One, to ensure that child's safety, and two, to really be sure that they're not, as soon as you put your hands on a child, that's considered a restraint and you have to be very careful. We would be trained, legally trained in restraint training, but still they encouraged us not to do that. So that's something else that is occurring, and again, absolutely negatively impacting the rest of the children in the class. Okay. So, I'm sorry, you can keep going, that's kind of the same thing. So, real world consequences. Well, like we just said, loss of instructional time for students, which leads to poor achievement. And second is stress and anxiety for teachers, leading to burnout and lack of teacher retention, which you so eloquently talked about. I would stake my life on it. Every teacher is doing the very best for the most part that they can. They come to school every day wanting their children to succeed, wanting to do the very best they can. And most children don't come to school thinking, I'm going to have a really crappy day today. But there are children who come to school who need that additional support, and what we're doing isn't working. But it's not just not working for them, it's not working for all of the children. And as a principal, I even would think, man, I'd have my day planned out, I'd want to go in, provide instructional support with walkthroughs, evaluations, things like that, but as soon as there's the behavior, my schedule's thrown all off and I'm dealing with that. When you're dealing with a child who has a chronic behavior problem, as a teacher, it's exhausting and it's stressful and traumatic. So we do see more and more teachers becoming frustrated and leaving the profession as a result, leaving earlier than they would. And then also, when students see that there aren't negative consequences, and when I talk about negative consequences, I mean more punitive, like expulsion, suspension, timeout. And when I say timeout, like standing on the fence at recess. We're told now in my district, you can't take recess away from the child because they need that time to play. They need that activity level, which students do need, that play, that activity level, but at the same time, that's a natural consequence. Buddy, you need to finish this work. As soon as you finish this work, you can go out. You can't do that. So we want the joy, we want the excitement. Every child is entitled to a free public education, and we want to make it the best we can, but we need to do better. So thank you so much.